Hello, please.
Police. Oh, what you get me, man?
Release the phone.
Yeah, I've got it.
Relax your arms. Relax your arms. Relax your arms.
Bang out, you're under arrest on suspicion of being a conspiracy to supply controlled drugs, okay? So you don't have to say anything but in my own defence. You don't mention one question, something which later on in court. No. Anything you do say may be given evidence.
September 21st, 2022. Digbeth, Birmingham, early morning. The streets are quiet, but inside an ordinary block of flats, something extraordinary is about to unfold. Plainclothes detectives have been watching for hours. The tension is thick with patience and precision. Then, out of the silence, a BMW M5 pulls up. The engine hums, doors open. But before its occupant can step inside, officers move in. 3 mobile phones clatter to the pavement. 3 small devices. But one of them holds the key to everything. It's the infamous number 1515 drug line. Thousands of incoming calls and texts. Years of meticulous tracking. A complex network of supply hidden behind what appeared to be everyday taxi journeys. But as the phones hit the ground, the truth is about to be uncovered. How did a man posing as just another driver quietly build one of Nottingham's busiest drug operations, and why did it take years to bring him down? To understand how the number 1515 drug line came to be, you must first understand its architect. Daniel Calick was a name familiar in certain circles, not for violence or notoriety, but for his ability to stay under the radar. Growing up in the urban Midlands, he was no stranger to the rhythm of the streets, where commerce and caution walk side by side. In cities like Nottingham, where demand for street drugs has long been steady, there was opportunity for those who understood its quiet language. Calick's world wasn't built in alleyways or bruising turf wars. Instead, it was woven through something far more ordinary, the everyday ebb and flow of city life. He didn't draw attention to himself. He blended in. Phones and cash passed through his hands with ease. Contacts were made. Messages were sent. At a time when most communication was traceable, he used multiple devices, each one a thread in his expanding network. Journeys that looked like routine taxi runs became something else. Essential links in a growing supply chain. To the casual observer, Calick was just another driver in a city of drivers. But beneath that ordinary surface was a methodical operator, someone who understood how to move discreetly, how to stay out of sight while keeping everything within reach. Years before police realized how big the operation was, Calick had already learned how to stay invisible. By the time detectives would later begin piecing the operation together, Daniel Calick was no longer working alone. What emerged from the investigation was a structure built on reliability, not intimidation. Orders were taken. Deliveries were made. Payments were collected. There were no public disputes, no unnecessary noise, just consistency. That reliability became his currency. Slowly, others were brought in. These were not random associates. They were runners. Individuals trusted to move drugs across Nottingham and beyond, often using vehicles that attracted little attention. Communication was tightly controlled. Calick did not rely on a single device. He carried multiple mobile phones, each with a specific purpose, each separating layers of the operation. Money followed strict rules. Cash only. No names. No receipts. No traceable transactions. For a time, it worked. But in February 2020, that routine was interrupted. On the streets of Radford, a Volkswagen Golf caught the attention of a marked police vehicle. As officers followed, the driver accelerated sharply. Seconds later, a small package was thrown from the car. The vehicle was stopped. Inside were Daniel Calick and his front seat passenger, Adil Matlub. When officers recovered the discarded package, they found white tablets wrapped in a black bag. Inside the car, more evidence followed: cash, cannabis, and critically, 2 mobile phones on each man. Both were arrested on suspicion of possession of Class A drugs with intent to supply. At their home addresses, officers uncovered multiple kilograms of cannabis and smaller quantities of Class A drugs. On the surface, it looked substantial, enough, perhaps, to shut down a street-level operation. But something didn't add up. The phones told no immediate story. Their contents were locked away behind encryption, pending forensic analysis. With no decoded data and no wider picture yet visible, both men were released under investigation. To police, it appeared they had intercepted a dealer mid-transaction. What they couldn't yet see was scale. They didn't know that the phones they held were only fragments, that dozens more existed, rotating constantly. They didn't know that orders were already being rerouted, runners replaced, routines adjusted. The supply didn't slow. The messages didn't stop. And the network carried on, almost uninterrupted. At the time, officers thought they'd caught a dealer. They didn't yet realize they'd brushed against the center of a far larger network. As months passed, investigators began to see something they hadn't expected. The arrests in early 2020 hadn't slowed supply. If anything, activity appeared to increase. Phone data, once decoded, pointed not to a single dealer, but to a system. One that adapted quickly, replaced parts without hesitation, and kept running even when pressure mounted. That realization marked the beginning of Operation Moonbeam. Unlike the first phase, this investigation would focus on one thing alone: Daniel Calick and the network built around him. At the center was a number that appeared again and again during forensic analysis. Number 1515. It wasn't just a contact. It was a gateway. A dedicated drug line handling orders for cocaine, ecstasy, LSD, cannabis, and 2CB, alongside psychoactive substances and prescription medication including Xanax. Customers didn't need introductions. They didn't need trust. They just needed the number. And the demand was relentless. In some months, the line received more than 10,000 incoming calls and text messages. Requests arrived at all hours. Not only through standard messaging, but via WhatsApp and other social media platforms, spreading the operation far beyond a single street or neighborhood. To fulfill that demand, the structure expanded. Runners were deployed across Nottingham and surrounding areas, many of them posing as taxi drivers, moving freely through the city without drawing attention. Vehicles came and went. Routes changed. Phones rotated. The work looked ordinary. The volume was anything but. As the organization grew, so did the cast around Calick. Adil Matlub emerged as his closest associate, a trusted figure involved across multiple layers of supply. Alongside him, Umair Azam and Arsan Raja became increasingly visible within the investigation, each linked through seizures, phone data, and cash movements. On the surface, the lifestyle told one story: high-performance cars. A BMW M5. An Audi RS3. The outward signs of success. But behind that image, police monitoring was tightening. Each arrest fed the data. Each seized phone mapped the network. Each delivery revealed patterns. What had once looked like scattered street dealing was now clearly organized, commercial, and highly structured. And yet, for all its scale, it remained fragile. Every new runner increased risk. Every additional phone created exposure. Every message left a trace. By the end of this phase, detectives understood one thing clearly. The operation was bigger than anyone had first imagined, but it was also becoming harder to control. Because the more the phones rang, the harder it became to keep control. By now, the operation had reached a level detectives would later describe as industrial. Drugs were moving daily, not just across Nottingham, but outward, following demand wherever it led. Supply no longer depended on a single car, a single route, or a single person. Vehicles were rotated constantly, appearing briefly, then disappearing back into traffic. What looked routine was anything but. Behind the scenes, the money told its own story. Cash was accumulating faster than it could be explained. It was scattered, split, moved, and stored in ways designed to reduce exposure, patterns investigators would later recognize as clear indicators of laundering activity. No central point. No obvious weak link. Just fragments, carefully separated. But pressure was building. On March 19, 2021, that pressure broke the surface. officers stopped 2 taxis in Nottingham. What they found confirmed long-held suspicions: quantities of Class A, B, and C drugs, mobile phones, and wads of cash. The arrests of Umair Azam and Arsan Raja sent a signal through the network. Someone had been compromised. From that moment on, surveillance intensified. Vehicles were tracked. Movements logged. Phone activity scrutinized. Each stop added another layer to a picture that was finally becoming clear. Khalik felt it. His behavior began to change. He no longer stayed in one place for long. Hotels replaced routine addresses, temporary bases chosen for convenience and distance. Phones were switched out more frequently, numbers discarded before patterns could settle. Devices that once stayed active for weeks were now replaced in days. The confidence that had fueled expansion gave way to calculation. Every journey carried risk. Every stoplight felt longer. Every unexpected knock could be the end. Yet the operation continued. Orders were still fulfilled. Runners still moved. The drug line stayed active. But the margin for error was shrinking fast. Because at this scale, visibility is unavoidable. And with each seizure, each arrest, each recovered phone, detectives were closing in, not on isolated dealers, but on the structure holding it all together. By now, everyone involved understood the truth. One wrong move could expose years of work. And the net was tightening. By late 2021, the investigation reached a moment where patience finally began to pay off. In September, officers tracked Daniel Khalik to the Edgbaston Park Hotel in Birmingham. It was a temporary base, one of several, chosen for convenience, distance, and the belief it offered separation from the streets where the network operated. It didn't. When officers moved in, searches uncovered cannabis, 3 canisters of nitrous oxide, and several mobile phones. Among them was a device investigators had been waiting to see again: the drug line phone. For the first time, police weren't just intercepting fragments. They were recovering control points. Days later, pressure spread outward. On the 24th of November, 2021, officers spotted Adel Matloob driving across Trent Bridge. The smell of cannabis filled the vehicle. Matloob told officers he had been eating cannabis brownies, but the search that followed revealed far more: 5,725 pounds in cash, quantities of cannabis, drug paraphernalia, and 4 mobile phones. Each phone added weight. Each seizure reduced uncertainty. Then, in January 2022, attention shifted to Castle Marina. Acting on fresh intelligence, officers arrested Nazir Chowdhury at his home address. Inside, they found over 1 kilogram of cannabis, multiple mobile phones, and £4,850 in cash. Another node removed. Another layer exposed. By now, devices were flowing steadily into forensic labs. And that's where the operation truly began to unravel. As analysts worked through months, and in some cases years, of stored data, patterns started to surface. Not rumors. Not assumptions. Patterns. A hierarchy emerged. A clear separation between decision-makers and runners. Phones assigned to roles, not people. Message timestamps revealed shift schedules. Call logs mapped delivery windows. Contact lists exposed how instructions moved down the chain without names ever being used. What had once looked chaotic now appeared precise. Orders came in. They were routed. They were fulfilled. Again and again. Each recovered device filled gaps left by the last. A phone seized in one arrest answered questions raised by another months earlier. The picture sharpened with every extraction. By this stage, investigators were no longer chasing dealers in cars or stopping taxis on suspicion alone. They were reading the operation from the inside out. This was no longer guesswork. The data was telling the story. By the summer of 2022, the operation was still running, but only just. The messages continued, but their rhythm had changed. Routes shifted. Drivers rotated more frequently. Phones came and went. To the people inside the network, it felt like caution. To investigators, it looked like fatigue. In August and September 2022, officers carried out a series of targeted stops across Nottingham. Taxi vehicles were pulled over. Searches followed. Inside, officers found cannabis packaged for supply, stored in takeaway tubs and Ziploc bags, hidden beneath seats and inside compartments. Mobile phones and cash were seized again and again, each stop reinforcing what the data already showed. The operation was being squeezed from every angle. Then came September 21, 2022. Outside a block of flats on Lombard Street, Digbeth, officers watched as Daniel Kallick approached a vehicle linked to drug supply, a BMW M5. As he reached the driver's door, detectives moved in. The arrest was immediate. As Kallick was detained, 3 mobile phones fell to the ground. Among them was the device officers had been tracing for years, the drug line phone. This time, there would be no return to routine. Searches of Kallick's flat followed. Inside, officers recovered ecstasy, cannabis, cash, and multiple mobile devices. The pieces that had once been scattered were now in one place. Within days, the impact rippled through the network. Runners stopped responding. Numbers went dead. Vehicles that once moved daily fell silent. Without its center, the operation collapsed with surprising speed. What had taken years to build unraveled in weeks. With arrests completed and evidence secured, the case moved from streets and surveillance logs into the courtroom. Court proceedings began, bringing together years of phone data, financial evidence, seizures, and testimony. For the first time since the investigation began, there was nowhere left to hide. The network was finished. And the story was about to be told in full, not through encrypted messages or coded calls, but under oath. The investigation that had unfolded quietly over years now reached its public conclusion inside Nottingham Crown Court. What had once existed as messages, movements, and data charts was laid out in full, a coordinated drugs conspiracy, structured, commercial, and far-reaching. One by one, the individuals tied to the network stood before the court, their roles defined not by street reputation, but by evidence. At the center of the case was the organizer, the individual responsible for coordinating supply, controlling communication, and directing others across multiple cities and vehicles. Daniel Kallick was sentenced to 14 years and 5 months imprisonment. Operating directly beneath him was a trusted associate involved across supply levels, communications, and logistics, whose actions placed him at the core of daily distribution. Adil Matloob was sentenced to 12 years imprisonment. Another key figure was linked through arrests, seizures, and financial evidence, playing an active role in the movement and handling of controlled drugs within the network. Arsan Raja was sentenced to 8 years and 6 months imprisonment. Investigators also identified an individual responsible for transporting and storing drugs, connected to multiple vehicle searches and financial seizures during the operation. Umair Azam was sentenced to 3 years imprisonment. Further down the structure, police uncovered a participant responsible for holding and supplying significant quantities of cannabis, operating from a residential address rather than vehicles. Nazir Chowdhury was sentenced to 5 years and 2 months imprisonment. Jacob Dunn was sentenced to 2 years and 9 months imprisonment. Others occupied lower but still essential roles, distributing drugs, handling cash, and maintaining the flow that kept the line active. As sentencing concluded, Detective Constable Stephen Fennin of Nottinghamshire Police's Serious and Organised Crime Unit addressed the outcome. He described Kallick as the focus of Operation Moonbeam 2, a man who lived a lavish lifestyle while coordinating one of the busiest drug lines officers had encountered in recent years. He confirmed the deliberate use of taxi drivers as cover, the constant rotation of phones, and the scale of effort required to dismantle the network. With the verdicts delivered, the impact was immediate. The number 1515 drug line was shut down. The network it supported was dismantled. The tactic of disguising dealers as taxi drivers was exposed publicly. For Nottingham and surrounding areas, the effect was tangible, a sudden disruption to supply and the removal of a system that had operated quietly for years. What remained was the record. a detailed account of how ordinary movements hid extraordinary volume, and how patience, data, and time ultimately brought the operation to an end. For years, the operation survived on movement, silence, and repetition. Phones were changed. Vehicles were rotated. Faces blended into the city. It appeared controlled. But what ultimately brought it down wasn't speed or force. It was time. Patient surveillance. Quiet stops. Devices seized and stored. Messages preserved long after they were sent. While the network adapted on the streets, investigators were building something slower, a record that couldn't be erased. Every call left a trace. Every message added weight. Every decision narrowed the distance between freedom and consequence. What took years to construct was undone by data and persistence. Calic answered thousands of calls. But in the end, it was one call he couldn't avoid. If this case made you think, take a moment to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you don't miss our next investigation into how organized crime hides in everyday life.